should be all alike. Academically, he probably is not. So therefore, the teacher has to meet the needs of the children who are academically bright and the ones who are very slow. And she has to give each one individual care. That's why the classes must be not larger than 15 at the most. Sometimes we'd have to take 20, but that would be hard luck. But the principle was to keep the children of one age group together until they reached high school age. From high school on, I don't know just about that. But that was the grammar school. And she believed in lots of craft work, lots of handwork, outside plays. That's why she had folk dancing and so much of those things in hand beside just the plain school work. You see, she had a big shop. Every child took shop. Every had a period of shop. Every child had a period of craft work. And the craft was clay and pine needles and silver and weaving, all sorts of the crafts she brought into the school. And there was a special teacher for each subject.
Who were some of the teachers that came and taught? Who taught folk dancing, for instance?
Mr. Raybould, Mrs. Johnson traveled. She was in Denmark and she was in England giving lectures on progressive education quite a bit. And she met Mr. Raybould in England on some of the folk dances they had there. Cecil Sharp of England he was a prominent man with the folk dancing of all the countries, and he had quite a collection from Italy and Spain and Mexico and all different things, and he collected them into a group. This Mr. Raybould trained under Cecil Sharp, and he heard Mrs. Johnson lecture, and he was also in New York, and he heard her lecture in New York, and he became interested in the school, and she persuaded him to come to Fairhope and to teach folk dancing in her school. And the folk dancing became quite prominent. The World's Fair in Dallas, Texas, one time, they sent a group down there for, I guess they were there 3 months. I know that because my daughter was in that group and went with them. And they had the old English folk dances at the Old English Village every day for so many hours. And her schoolwork was not boredom. Now, I had 3rd and 4th grades. We had no desks. We just had big tables with chairs. And we could just move them around different places and wherever you wanted.
When you say 3rd and 4th grades, were they called grades or were they called something else?
They were called life classes.
Mm-hmm.
The first life class was 6 and 7. The second life class was 8 and 9, and then 10 and 11 and 12 was the third life. And then beyond the 12th, I had just plain high school. Most of that progressive education was from the 12th grade down.
What took place in teacher training? How were the teachers taught to teach?
We all studied all these books on progressive education, and we were given certain periods a day to take for certain classes. And we're trained with what we learned in the books and what Mrs. Johnson taught us too. So we did the real person training there with her right in the school. And then when they were ready, they would go different places. I taught one summer in Greenwich, Connecticut, and I taught another summer in Oak Park, Chicago, under her guidance and under her school that she had for summer schools in these places. Greenwich, Connecticut is very wealthy, and they were interested very much in progressive education. They wanted Mrs. Johnson to give up the school in Fairhope completely and come to Greenwich, and they said they'd give her all the support she needed, which undoubtedly they would because it's a wealthy town. But she wouldn't do it. She said no. The Fairhope was the starter, and she was keeping it. So she held summer schools there.
She held summer schools in Connecticut then?
Summer school in Connecticut, and that's where I taught one summer up there with her in Connecticut in one of her summer schools. And we had the poor little old rich children. I felt so sorry for them, I didn't know what to do. Some of the Vanderbilts and Rockefellers and that bunch, they'd all come in, and they'd come in a great big car with a chauffeur, and they'd have a nurse, and they'd all come in to bring this poor little child into school. Well, they want to come in the room and sit down where the child was, and Mrs. Johnson wouldn't have it. She made them sit in the hall. She had the child in by himself in the room. Well, the little kid was scared to death when he was on his own, you see, without the nurses to hang on to at the age of 8 and 9 that way. He wasn't on his own feet really then, but that was her object, was to make the child be his own self. And when they go out at recess to play, why, the children wouldn't play with the other children, they just hang on to the nurse's hand. And there was a bunch of little Italians in Greenwich, Connecticut. The Italians were very, very smart, and they were very, very clean. And Mrs. Johnson believed that if any child wanted an education, he should have it, regardless of circumstances, financial circumstances. And so they tried to keep the little Italian children out, the wealthier people did, and she said no. So the only thing that she did, she put them in 2 rows in the classroom for themselves. I had 2 rows of little Italians and the side off away from the other children. Well, you know, those little Italians could cut circles around those little rich folks. It just tickled me to death. They were clean as they could be and just as smart and bright. It was wonderful to see the contrast.
Did you teach at the organic school here in Fairhope?
Yeah. Did what? Did I teach here?
Uh-huh.
Oh, yes. I taught here for so many years, I couldn't tell you how many. And then I married and was out for some time. Then I went back again, taught many years later.
Okay.
But I always taught the same grade, the 8 and 9-year-olds.
What about the Bell Building? How was that used?
The Bell Building was the building. The Bell Building, when it was first built, wasn't built for the organic school. It was built for the public school. It was a public school. And as a young girl, when I was in high school, I went to the Bell Building in the North Room at the school. Well, in later years, the public school outgrew itself, and they built another building, and Joseph Fells and some of the wealthy people that were interested in Mrs. Johnson's educational ideas bought that whole 10 acres for Mrs. Johnson and gave it to her for her idea for her school. And so that's where the Bell Building was turned into the organic school. But originally, it was a public school building.
Well, if she had, like, the high school, the grades in the north wing, and then the lower life people in the south side,
Yeah.
how were these classes structured? I mean, physically in the room, was it just one big room with a bunch of classes in it?
No, because some of the classes would be down to shop, some of them would be down to craft work, down doing crafts, and they weren't all ganged up there together. They were all separated out, more or less. And then eventually it got too big, so they added that 3rd room on the Bell Building. You know, the one to the west, there's a room there sticks out by itself, a big one. That was added on later. But the original building was just the north and south Bell Buildings.
Well, did you ever take the children down to the bay?
Oh yes, we always went. We went on walks. We went on walks. We went on walks in the gully. We'd take them on the gullies. And in those days, they was quite a fad to have a bottle of sand, colored sand. You'd take a bottle and put just a little water in the bottom. And you'd go down these gullies, and you'd hold your bottles up, had to be held up pretty straight, and carry it along. And you'd look up in the banks of the gully, and you'd see a streak maybe of dark yellow. Well, you'd climb up the bank, and you'd put a little bit of that dark yellow in the bottle, and you'd shake it a little bit, and it would settle down, and there'd be one layer of dark soil. Well, then you'd go along, and maybe you'd see another color of sand, and you'd put that in. And there was one strip, only one place that I've ever known down here that there was a strip of lavender. And they had to be used carefully because it wasn't very big. And you put a strip of that sand in there and shake it. And when you got through, if you did it right, well, you had the layers, different color layers in this bottle.
So you had a geological profile of...
Yes, it was a geological profile of the layers of sand in the gully. And we took many walks in the gullies, down on the beaches, And when we took these walks, we'd gather leaves from the different trees, and we'd take them back to school. We'd draw them on the paper. We'd discuss the edges